Welcome to 247 Real Talk. It's a pleasure to be here with you again for another week. I'm your host, Julian Perry. Hope you had a great week since we last spoke. On this episode, we're going to talk a little bit more about things that affect our lives. It wasn't what I planned, but there's something that happened that I wanted to bring to your attention. So we're going to talk a bit about life and mental health issues and desperation and things that hopefully that we can work through so that you don't face those challenges or you know what to do when you have those challenges. So sit back, relax, and I'll be right back. So welcome back to the 247 Real Talk podcast. Again, my name is Julian Perry. I'm the host, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. Like I said in my intro, this was not what I planned to talk about this week. I usually have a list of topics, and it's quite long, actually, with what was going on in today's world. But I kind of moved this up, well, not moved it up, moved this into the lineup because of something that happened, and I'll look over here at my screen, and I'll tell you a little bit about what triggered it. Dr. Crystal P. Cassetta, a 40-year-old New York oncologist, and her 4-month-old infant daughter were found dead in a home in Somers, New York. The New York State Police Bureau of Criminal Investigation in Somers is investigating it as a murder-suicide. 4-month-old child. And the way I heard the story in all the news reports, mother walks into the room, shoots her child, 4 months old. Happy. Maybe the other child is a lot older and didn't want another child. Maybe because they were an only child, they felt, they got all the attention, and now they had to share it. I remember when my daughter was born, my son was still, because my children are, and don't get me to lying here, 3 and 6, up there about 18 months apart. And I remember when my daughter was born, we realized and we had to keep an eye carefully because my son would try to pinch her or hit her. He didn't understand what was going on. All he knew was he was the only child getting all his attention. All of a sudden, here comes this other child. Well, the same thing happens to adults sometimes. Selfish adults who have become a lifestyle and have become enamored by whatever it is that they've become absorbed into. And this child now represents all the things that we talk about after our children grow, right? So I remember having conversations with people and talking about the cost of Pampers and missing many events because I had to stay with the kids. Or both of my kids had RSV when they were young, so there was one occasion where I spent 36 hours in the emergency room with them. There's another occasion where I think in a week I rushed to the emergency room 3 times, and they almost admitted them 3 times because of their breathing and the oxygen levels. So these are the challenges that parents face, and not all of them deal with it well. The same selfishness, the same blame is part of a bigger picture of who you are, who you've become. And when you hear someone get to the point where they commit a murder-suicide, where they kill a child that they birthed, and then kill themselves, understand that that's not just murder-suicide. That is an issue of depression. That's a mental health issue. And what forced me to, this whole situation, reading this, and actually I heard it in the news first, and then I did my research. The whole situation made me think back to other episodes that I've had where I talk about mental health. It's a topic that we're going to have a lot of discussions about because it encompasses so much. Many people feel that they're mentally healthy because they make assumptions about mental health and they fail to realize that they're not. People who are blatantly introverted are going through something that's affecting them mentally. It's not necessarily something that would cause them to hurt themselves or anyone, but it is a mental condition. Women who give birth go through a period of depression, and that's a mental health issue. Families that plan a future only to have it disrupted by a mean boss who fires them or who would never promote them, who puts them in a hard time when they're trying to go to school and they're not finishing fast enough and the bills are coming and cost of living is going up, and then here comes a child that they're not against but they didn't really plan it, and people ask the other one the stupid question like, how did this happen? Well, even if the person was using precaution, there's no 100% proof in that way, right? So all those things are issues that weigh upon us mentally. I find it extremely important in the time we live in because we don't even have the luxury of isolating mental challenges. What I mean is we're engulfed in an environment, especially here in the United States. Look around you. Turn the news on. And I don't mean to depress you by hearing this, but I mean to bring you to a place of reality, a place of not turning a blind eye anymore, a place of acknowledgement. I listen to 1010 Wins, I think I've said that many times, on the Odyssey app, on my phone when I go to work in the morning. I like to hear the news. When I'm driving my car here, I listen to 1010 Wins. Even though they repeat the news over and over again, they stick something else in there. My wife hates it because she's like, haven't you heard this over and over again? Enough already. But that's what I like to do. Part of why I haven't turned away from it when I think she has is because I find issues of society that allow me to have these conversations with you. But if you listen to 1010 Wins in the morning, or better yet, is a better part, there's also the 1010 Wins notifications, the updates, all through the day as things happen. Most of the stuff that happens, that 1010 Wins reports, you don't hear on TV or in the news. Up to today, I heard about a boy in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, who was shot and he's in critical, he's in the hospital. And that kind of story you can hear sometimes 3 times a day. There's always a slashing, a stabbing. I think yesterday was a 70-something-year-old man was slashed. I think there's another man who was slashed and killed on the subway. If you're riding the subway every day, you're being careful with yourself. But if you don't listen to the sources or the outlets that report some of these things, you wouldn't realize what's going on around you. And we as human beings tend to do that, right? We become so focused. We have such tunnel vision in regards to survival. Not our faults. Not our faults, at least not singularly our fault. This is what's going on around us that no one is doing anything to fix. So we don't hear all these stories except for someone like myself, I guess, or the newspaper journalist or whatever who actually looks to pay attention to what's going on around us in that arena. So every day you hear about the shootings. There's 2-3 shootings every day. Some weekends, by the time Monday morning comes, and I'm driving into the railroad station, they talk about 12 people were shot over the weekend. There are a lot of young kids, 14, 15, being shot. Several of them are being shot to death. Those children have parents. There's a lot of gangs out there, again, killing each other. There are a lot of people who have gone through a lot of oppression of, monetarily, stuck in a certain socioeconomic category, and now they've got to deal with burying their children. These people are in a mental health crisis, even if they speak with you and seem normal. Many times people don't recognize that they're in a crisis until they snap, until their reality crosses a line to where it's no longer a reality, or their reality becomes something that's no longer realistic. Then we have to deal with the news of the political news. And the thing about it that I talk about that so much, I try to stay away from the actual meat of what's going on now, only because I do not want my podcast or my messages to get caught up in this political hatred and this battle that's going on right now. What I want us all to focus on as one people is the fact that we take the time every year to vote in November, different elections, and the people go into office, and most of them forget who we are, how they got there. It's like we vote for them and we put a crown on their heads, and now they go off and live their fairy tale life, and they forget that the fact that they were elected by the people for the people. We look at the challenges. I'm going to bring it back to student loans again, because we look at the challenges of that people are facing now. Add another layer to the mental health crisis. If you are post-COVID, let's look at this scenario for a second. You went through COVID, you lost some loved ones. Cost of living went up. You lost maybe one of the bread, your other half, that's half of the breadwinner. You're barely making it to. You haven't received an increase in your job or your salary. And now student loans are due again. You were holding on to hope that since you've faced all of these crises, and since you're still dealing with the things that existed pre-COVID, the systemic racism, they're putting out 300-400 applications for a job, and no one calls you. And I'm going to talk about that for a quick second in a moment. But the point is, you're dealing with all that pressure. You're barely surviving. Maybe you have kids and you're shielding your kids from this reality, because at this point you want them to focus on their lives, on their school. You want them to focus on enjoying being a child. And that is something else we'll talk about in another episode, because many children today, unless you belong to a certain socioeconomic category or you have a certain socioeconomic status, you don't enjoy life as a child. You can't go to a playground and duck bullets and enjoy life as a child. You can't not have basic necessities at home and enjoy life as a child. And these things create a mental health crisis for parents. But no one in Washington really cares. No one, why is it that, and I'll say this again, why is it that many Republicans, I'm going to call them out, Republican senators, who received so much forgiveness of their loans, their PPP loans during COVID, are opposing Biden's, and have opposed Biden's student debt reduction plan. Many of them have come out to say, well, if you took out the student loans, you should pay them back, which I think is the intention of 99.9% of students when you take out the loans. But more so, this is the message coming from people who got millions of dollars of loans forgiven. Are you hearing me? Do you realize that we sit around every day struggling as bottom feeders almost, while these people sit at the top and live a completely hypocritical life? Believe that they have certain rights that are not the rights of all people. They're only the rights of those who have been elected to those positions and managed to maintain it. How could you possibly be a senator who received over $1 million in loan forgiveness, and you have a problem with someone getting $10,000 or $20,000 of student loans forgiven? How? What is it? Because you are powerful and wealthy now, that means that your struggles are over. But you need to feed your ego, to make sure that you feel big and powerful and almighty. You need someone else to look down on. And while you're doing that and ignoring the people who put you there, the rest of the population, these people are in crisis. And I keep using the word crisis because I want us to start looking at ourselves in the mirror and looking realistically at those around us. I want us to stop categorizing mental health issues in a way that it makes it seem like some people have it and many people don't, when in fact, it's not as narrow as we try to make it seem. When I was a kid, someone that you would call having a mental health crisis, and we didn't use those words back then. We use different words I don't think are appropriate today. But someone with a mental health crisis exhibited that behavior, right? They're talking to themselves. They're walking down the street. You go to the Caribbean or whatever. The road, the asphalt is crazy hot. They're walking there with no shoes on, bare feet on the asphalt, and they're pulling out their hair. And they identified in that manner that where you could clearly distinguish the differences between them and everyone else. But what do you say when a 40-year-old mother shoots her 4-month-old child and then shoots herself? I'm sure to her co-workers and many other people, she seemed to have it all together. Do you remember Ellen DeGeneres? Do you remember her DJ? You remember Twitch? I would never have thought that Twitch was in a place of darkness, in a mental health crisis. Do you remember Robin Williams, comedian, made everybody laugh? Mental health crisis. The list is long. Many celebrities out there, for different reasons of their environment, even with money, go through the same challenges. So if we strip away the money and we strip away the wealth and we strip away the everything else that makes us different and we create one level playing field, we realize that there are human factors that create mental health crisis, sometimes temporarily, but along this journey of life, I think we all go through them. I've spoken to people who have tried to buy a home. Either they struggle, they go through hell to get a mortgage, and we're going to talk about that. There's just so much to talk about, where mortgages are designed based on not only socioeconomic status, they're also designed based on ethnicity, how much you get approved for. But I don't want to digress to that. There are people who have gone through that battle. They eventually found the right realtor. They got the right mortgage company. They got a decent pre-approval because they make the income. Then they're dealing with finding a home and the process. And everywhere along the process, there's someone questioning their ability. There's someone not wanting them to be there. There's someone who doesn't want another minority to buy another house, at least not in that neighborhood. People are thinking about, well, I want that neighborhood because my kids are struggling. They're brilliant, but they need to go to a neighborhood where society cares enough to actually invest in the schools so they can get a proper education. That is something else we have to talk about. That's another crisis for many parents. We all can't live in the best neighborhoods. We all can't live in the same neighborhoods. But have you ever noticed that certain neighborhoods get more money and more allowances and everything towards this, more investment in their schools, while others don't? And do you realize because of that, they pay their teachers more, and so they get a certain level of education that other areas don't? And do you realize that when people buy homes, they buy the homes, they're looking for the school neighborhood instead of looking for the environment, maybe they're the beach or whatever. They have to put everything else aside. All these things can affect your mental health. Getting up in the morning, dealing with the commute to work in New York, possibly seeing a crime occur in front of you, possibly seeing domestic violence, possibly seeing a homeless person or a transient on the train, possibly encountering an EDP, possibly being in danger of being pushed onto the subway tracks, possibly dealing with having to get to work on time when the trains are not working, possibly dealing with a train that as you ran down the stairs, closed the doors even though the conductor saw you standing there and let the train go, and now you're going to be late, getting into work and dealing with supervisors and co-workers who are going through the exact same struggle that you are of their own, but because they're your supervisors, they take it out on you. How does it feel? And many of us, and they say many of you, many of us have gone through the struggle of going to a job, understanding that the end game is, I had a friend of mine who retired now, a co-worker, who used to say every 14 days. What he was referring to is that's what you have to focus on. That's a shame. You're so mentally fatigued and tired with the whole situation around you. and then you go to a job that you spend 8 hours a day at least, and you're around people who have this hatred and all these issues they're dealing with that they've brought in there, and they have decided that if they're in a role that's higher than you, and they have they're in your hierarchy and they're above you, to take all that frustration and everything they're dealing with and use you as an outlet, not in a good way. And you have to go to work knowing that all your focus has to be on every 14 days in your paycheck and the family you come home to. It's a beautiful thing to come home to a family, but do you understand going to work and not wanting to go to work? Going to a job that you hate? Making every effort to go to a job that you love and you're not getting hired for many reasons? That's a mental health stress. Trying to make things meet every day when the bills are going up, when things are not even making sense. In New York, in Nassau County where I am, I look at my electricity bill, and about 50% of the electricity bill is delivery charges and other fees. So if you are paying, if you used $200 electricity, you're paying a $400 bill. Are we for real? And you have politicians who, war going on in Ukraine. You notice if you listen to the news now, they've stopped talking about the aid monetarily for the most part, because I think everyone in society would be appalled if they found out how much money they've spent in the war with Russia and Ukraine. But no, it's easier to stand in front of your own people, and because of your political ideology and the need to separate yourself, the need to hurt each other. I'm talking about the politicians in Washington. They're going to oppose something that can help so many people regardless of political ideology, while they get all the perks and all the perks of their position that we put them in. And they don't care how we live, the pressures that we face, and the result of those pressures. Something caused a 40-year-old woman to walk into her infant's bedroom, put a bullet in the body of a 4-year-old child, and put a bullet in her own head. 40 years old. There's a good possibility, barring an anomaly, that she might not even have been at the half point of her life yet, or maybe around there. That child was 4 months old. That child was a selected part of her stress and depression and mental health illness. That child who didn't ask to come into this world and will never get to see this world. And we collectively are all to blame. Either because we, the politicians, I'm referring to them in Washington, are doing exactly what we discussed, or we are in our own struggles and we have gotten so blind to what's around us because we are so busy struggling that we have stopped looking for solutions. We've stopped looking for unity. We've stopped identifying with who we are, and we become completely distracted with the survival game when that's not the right path, nor the path that can lead us to where we need to go. People spend their entire life struggling and die and never get to this goal that they're seeking because they go about it the wrong way. I have a friend of mine that I always refer to him as my biggest supporter of this podcast, who pushes me in topics and who pushes me to get stronger, who pushes me to have more revealing conversations. One of the things I admire about him is his travels and his support of minorities and his dedication to identifying with who we are, whose we are, where we came from, and the power that exists within black communities, and he hates the fact that I use the word minority. So I've used it so many times in this episode, but people of color, let's use it that way. people of color, and all people. We all have so much power in unity. But since society has decided historically and continuously to separate people of color from everyone else, then the people of color need to harness the power within your communities by becoming united instead of, and not only becoming united, but by doing what he's been doing, and what he's been teaching me in many ways. And that is exploring and learning more about our origin, our history, and in fact, how powerful we are. Understanding where we've come from and how uniquely powerful we are. And this has a lot to do with mental health, because the minute you bring value into your life, the minute you realize that there's someone else you could count on, you're not alone. The minute you realize that you have built wealth within your own community, so when you go out looking for a job, you can go look for a job in your own community and get hired in your own community with a high percentage of, if you qualify for the job, being hired. Life will change. I know that's a big change. That's not a tomorrow, that's not a today change. That's not a tomorrow change. That's not a day after tomorrow change. That's a future change. But it will continue to be a future change if we don't pursue it and make our future become our present. I urge you to pay attention beyond our immediate daily struggle. Look around you. See where help is needed. Understand that people don't necessarily verbalize their struggles. And understand that many people put a facade on to hide their pain. But a lot of times, if we pay attention, we'll see things and recognize things that people do. And I'm guilty of this too. Okay? I have my own struggles. And I have to tell you that I told my wife one day, I said, there's a different struggle with having a podcast. And that's because as I look at my growth over the last 3 years, I realize how much more in touch with humans I've become. And that's because I've interviewed and dealt with so many situations, some horrible ones. If you go back through, you won't see it on the YouTube because my YouTube is relatively new. I put that up this year. But if you go to the audio podcast and you go all the way back to the 3 years when I started, this is episode, I think, 165. If you go all the way back, you will find episodes where I had guests, people who suffered immensely and who made it through. People who suffered, who are still suffering. And you will recognize that what I'm saying is that when I've dealt enough with that type of reality, to the point that I become absorbed in it, looking for a solution, looking for a way to help, looking for a way to bring about change. It has forced me to open my eyes, open my horizon. It has forced me to be less judgmental or not judgmental and recognize that things are not always as they seem. We have a mental health crisis, and it's not going away. We need to, as people, force our politicians to invest in different ways. Money is needed, but invest in time, invest in programs, invest in a way to give people a shameless way to seek help. And a way that says, if you seek help, you will not be judged by the people to whom you reach out, and you will not be judged by society. I remember years ago where I worked, there was a program for people who were struggling mentally. They could go talk to someone. And there were people in that situation who spoke with me personally, and they said, I'm not going because nothing is confidential. And if anyone finds out, I'm going to be judged. It's going to go into my personnel file, and my career is over. So they lived with it. I'm going to tell you one little story I maybe told before I end this podcast, this episode. Many years ago, I worked with this young guy who was a temp. And he worked as a temp for like 3 years, trying desperately to get hired. During that time, I remember he had a horrific car accident that he was injured for quite a while. And during that time, I think his mother died too. But one day he came to work and he was all smiles. I said, what's going on? He said, I got hired. I'm permanent. After 3 years, I'm permanent. I have a job that I don't have to worry about. And obviously it pays more money. About 2 weeks after being hired permanently, he was called downtown to personnel and dismissed. Apparently there was some issue with his application. From his perspective and his story it was nothing wrong. It was an error that was completely explainable. But this is another problem. There's so much to talk about. I've seen situations where you have explainable situations and things that happen by mistake. And the people that in personnel that are dealing with you, I don't want to hear, okay, never mind. I don't want to hear it. They don't want to entertain. They automatically look at everybody on the opposite side of their desk as the enemy, as someone who's coming in with a story, as someone who's going to lie. And so he tried to explain it, they didn't want to hear it. They terminated him. He came back to work to pick up his things. The next day I heard that he got on the Metro North, I think it was Railroad, and at some point he opened the window and jumped. Those are back when those trains had, again, maybe it was a conductor's window, I don't know, but he jumped out the train, his head hit a concrete culvert and he died. He basically jumped to his death. That job was everything he had. I think during the time too, he actually had a child. He and his fiancée, whatever, had a child. So that job was his connection, his only means to survival, to taking care of that child, to putting food on the table. And he had fought for 3 years. And in the 3 years he was a temp, he had a perfect record. And he's telling them, I did the application. I'm sorry, I misunderstood this. I made an error. No one wanted to listen. That's who we've become as human beings. We've forgotten that the other person that we're speaking to and speaking with is exactly like us. Different shade, different makeup, different family dynamic, but same challenges, same struggles, and it could be the same result. I urge you to continue to have conversations about mental health, to pay attention to your brothers, your sisters, your coworkers, and your children, your spouses, to not be so involved that we ignore the signs in front of us and the cries for help. I have been in that situation where I myself will confess to you that I have been guilty of taking people for granted and ignoring signs and cries for help. I am thankful and thank God that I got my revelation and recognized it before it was too late. So that I didn't cause that person and those people to take desperate measures because no one was listening. Listen to me, listen to them. It's always a pleasure to have these conversations with you because I feel that the feedback I get after is so inspiring. I wouldn't call the names of the many people who send me text messages and make sure they do every single week, who tell me to keep on keeping on. I'm trying to build this YouTube channel. I've got a lot of listeners on the audio podcast, on Buzzsprout and on my website and on the various apps. I get those statistics. But I like this because we're face to face. You get to see me. You get to see how emphatic I am. You get to hear me and put the sound with the face and the expression and the joy and the pain and the laughter and every emotion I evoke. Please subscribe to the channel. Not only does it let you know when I've posted a new podcast, but it helps me grow the channel. Share it. Tell somebody else about our conversations. Don't keep it to yourself. Those of you who are teachers, I know I have some professors and teachers and people like that in my audience. Share it with your students, with your faculty. Help them to start the conversations within their groups. Send me emails. Email address is podcast@247realtalk.net. That's podcast@247realtalk.net. Tell me what you want me to talk about, to discuss, to research, to bring back to you. Have your people gather in groups and become part of this conversation. And give me feedback so I can give you more. I thank you so much for another week, another honor and privilege to be a part of your lives, to come into your home, your environments, wherever you are. Hear what I'm saying. Join what I'm saying. And please be a part of what I'm saying and a part of this movement. Again, I thank you so very much. Have a great week ahead. Be good. Be safe. Take care of yourselves. And please take care of each other.